When you close your eyes and, picture the Vatican, what do you see? I'm guessing it's solemnity. High Mass, clouds of incense, Michelangelo's ceiling, a general sense of unshakable holiness.
That is the brand image, absolutely. It's the vibe the institution has cultivated for, 2,000 years?
Yeah.
A beacon of moral authority that sits above the fray of human pettiness.
But the stack of sources we're diving into today, it completely dismantles that image. We're not talking about holiness. We're talking about a history drenched in envy, lust, greed, pride, and wrath.
And I want to be really clear right off the bat, we are not doing the Dan Brown thing here.
Right.
No conspiracy theories, no lizard people, no secret alien archives. This deep dive is strictly into the verified official history of the papacy. These are events acknowledged by serious historians and, for the most part, the church itself.
That is the mission. We're stripping away the myths to see how the popes evolved from these persecuted underground leaders into absolute monarchs who, let's be honest, sometimes acted more like mob bosses than spiritual guides.
They really did.
We've got pirates, teenagers, and warlords wearing the papal tiara.
It's really a case study in one single fundamental problem.
Yeah.
What happens when you combine absolute spiritual authority, the claim to speak for God, with unchecked political power?
Yeah.
The history suggests the answer is, usually chaos.
So let's get into it. To understand how things went so wrong, we have to look at the foundation. Because it didn't start with golden palaces and Swiss guards.
No, not at all. It started in caves.
Right.
But theologically, everything, and I mean everything, rests on one specific sentence in the Bible, Matthew 16:18.
Right.
Jesus says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church."
It sounds like a metaphor, but for the Catholic Church, that's like a legal contract.
Exactly. It's the Petran supremacy. The argument is that Peter was the first boss, and every bishop of Rome after him inherits that status. But right there, that's the first friction point.
How so?
The Orthodox Christians read that exact same line and said, no, Peter is just the first among equals. That one sentence caused a 1,000-year rift.
So right from the jump, the claim to power creates this massive split. But in those early days, being the boss mostly just meant you were the first guy the Romans threw to the lions.
Right. It was a high-risk, low-reward job. But then the world breaks. The Western Roman Empire collapses.
Total power vacuum.
A massive one. The legions leave, the aqueducts stop working, and who's the only guy left standing with any administrative experience? The Bishop of Rome.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
And the papacy filled it. I mean, they absolutely filled it. But moral authority isn't enough when Visigoths are knocking at the door. They needed actual muscle.
So they need an army.
They need an army. So in the 8th century, they make a pivot that changes everything. They align with the Franks.
This is Pope Stephen II crowning Pepin the Short, and later Leo III crowning Charlemagne.
It was a transaction. It was. The popes gave these warlords legitimacy, telling them God says you're the king, and in exchange, the popes got protection. But this blurred the line. Suddenly, the pope is a kingmaker.
But if you're going to be a player in global politics, you need more than just a handshake deal. You need paperwork. And this brings us to one of the most audacious moments in the sources. The donation of Constantine.
The magic document. It suddenly surfaces about 400 years after Emperor Constantine died.
Right.
And it claimed that Constantine, on his deathbed, transferred supreme secular power over the entire Western Empire to the Pope. It was essentially the property deed to Europe.
That seems a little convenient that it just appeared right when the Pope needed to justify land grabs.
Extremely convenient. And as we now know, completely a total fabrication. The language they used, the Latin in the text, it didn't even exist during Constantine's time. But for centuries, nobody checked. It was used to justify wars, taxes, and the idea that the Pope was the ruler of kings.
So the foundation of this medieval superpower was, in part, built on a lie.
In terms of secular real estate, yes. And once that door to earthly power is open, you attract a different kind of candidate. You stop getting martyrs and theologians, and you start getting people who just want power.
Which brings us to the Iron Age of the papacy. This is where the sources get really gruesome. We have to talk about the Cadaver Synod.
It is arguably the nadir, the absolute bottom of papal history.
So set the scene for us. Late 9th century, we have Pope Stephen VI. He has a massive vendetta against his predecessor, Pope Formosus. But there's a logistical issue. Formosus has been dead for 9 months.
Most people would let it go. Stephen VI did not. driven by paranoia and likely pressure from his political faction, because remember, these popes were puppets of Roman noble families, he decided to put Formosus on trial anyway.
So he orders the body dug up.
He does. They drag this rotting corpse into the courtroom, dress it in full papal vestments, and prop it up on a throne.
I'm just trying to imagine the atmosphere in that room. The smell alone must have been unbearable.
It was horrific. And because a corpse can't defend itself, they appointed a deacon to stand behind the chair and answer for him.
No way.
Yes. So you have Pope Stephen screaming at a dead body, "Why did you usurp the throne?"
Yeah.
And this terrified deacon trembling, answering for the dead man.
It sounds like a fever dream. What was the verdict?
Guilty, obviously. And the punishment was symbolic, but just brutal. They cut off the 3 fingers of his right hand.
The fingers he'd used for blessings.
The very same ones, stripping his spiritual authority. Then they dragged the body through the streets and threw it into the Tiber River. But here's the kicker. The people of Rome, who had seen a lot, they finally snapped. This was too much.
And the sources mentioned an earthquake happened right around this time.
Yes, a tremor shook the basilica. The people took it as a direct vote from God. They rioted. Stephen VI was overthrown, thrown in prison, and strangled.
The Cadaver Synod feels like the moment the institution really went off the rails. It wasn't about theology anymore. It was just a blood sport.
It established that the papacy was a prize to be won, not a burden to be borne. And once you establish that, you move from wrath to lust. Welcome to the 10th century, or as historians call it, the pornocracy.
The rule of harlots. Now, looking at the sources, this period is dominated by one family, the Theophylacti, and specifically 2 women, Theodora and her daughter, Marozia.
Marozia is a fascinating figure. I mean, terrifyingly effective. She became the concubine of Pope Sergius III at age 15, but she wasn't just mistress, she was a power broker. For 50 years, if you wanted to be pope, you had to go through Marozia.
Wow.
She installed her lovers and eventually her own children on the throne.
This era was so chaotic that it actually birthed one of the most famous myths in church history, Pope Joan.
Right. The story that a woman disguised herself as a man, rose to the papacy, and was only discovered when she went into labor during a procession.
The sources are pretty clear this is a myth, but the church seemed terrified it might be true.
Well, it speaks to the insecurity of the time. There's this bizarre historical detail where, for centuries, a newly elected pope had to sit on a special chair with a hole in the seat.
The gender verification chair.
Literally, a deacon would reach under to manually verify the new pope was male and then announce, "We have a father."
HR practices have certainly evolved. But even without Pope Joan, the reality of Marozia's grandson, Pope John XII, is wild enough. He became pope at 18.
18 years old. Imagine giving an average 18-year-old absolute power, infinite money, and the belief that he is God's representative on earth.
Oh, no.
He turned the Lateran Palace into a brothel.
The sources detail him gambling and invoking pagan gods.
Jupiter, Venus, help me with these dice. It shows how completely disconnected he was from the faith. He was a secular prince playing dress-up, and his death was fitting. Allegedly killed by a jealous husband who found the Pope in bed with his wife.
You cannot make this stuff up. So we've covered envy, wrath, and lust. Let's move to greed and pride. We need to talk about Benedict IX.
Benedict IX holds a unique record. He is the only man to be pope 3 separate times.
3 times? Did he keep getting reelected?
No, it was much, much messier. The first time, he was installed by his powerful family. Again, very young, maybe as young as 12, likely 20. But he treated the papacy like a toy. And eventually, he got bored. He actually wanted to get married.
So what does a bored pope do?
He sold the office. He literally sold the papacy to his godfather for a cash payment.
He put the Holy See on Craigslist.
Essentially. This is the ultimate form of simony buying and selling church offices. He took the cash, retired, then decided he made a mistake and came back to fight for the throne again. It turned the spiritual leadership of Europe into personal property.
But while Benedict was greedy, our next figure, Boniface VIII, was suffering from terminal pride. This is the early 1300s.
Boniface is a pivotal figure. He fully bought into that 2 swords theory we mentioned. He claimed he held both the spiritual sword and the secular sword. He believed the Pope was the emperor of the world.
But by the 1300s, actual kings in France and England were getting stronger. They weren't just going to roll over like they did in the 8th century.
Exactly. Boniface picked a fight with King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair. Philip wanted to tax the clergy. Boniface said, "You can't tax my guys without my permission."
And this leads to the slap of an ongie.
It's a shocking moment. Philip sends soldiers to Italy. They capture the Pope in his hometown, and the commander of the troops, a man who despised Boniface, allegedly slapped the Pope across the face with a metal gauntlet.
A physical assault on the Vicar of Christ. That's unimaginable in the centuries before.
It shattered the mystique. Boniface was humiliated. He died shortly after, likely from the shock. And the consequence was huge. The French king forced the papacy to move from Rome to Avignon, France.
The Avignon captivity.
For nearly 70 years, the popes were essentially puppets of the French crown. It proved that for all their claims of absolute power, they could be broken by a king with an army.
And when they finally tried to move back to Rome, things didn't exactly go smoothly. This leads us to the Great Western Schism.
The ultimate confusion. The cardinals couldn't agree, factions split, and you end up with a situation where there isn't just one pope. There are two, and then eventually 3.
3 guys, all claiming to be the Pope, all excommunicating each other.
Yeah.
If I'm a peasant in 1400, who do I listen to?
You don't know. That's the terror of it. If you follow the wrong pope, you might be going to hell. Europe was divided. And out of this chaos rises perhaps the most colorful character in this entire story, Baldassare Cosa, also known as Pope John III.
But before he was Pope, his resume was a little different.
He was a pirate.
A pirate?
A legitimate high-seas pirate.
Mm-hmm.
He started his career in the Ten Devils gang, raiding ships, freeing his brother from prison by massacring the guards. The man was a warlord.
So how does a pirate become the Pope?
Violence was a currency. During the schism, the church factions needed enforcers, and Cosa was brutally effective. He studied law for a bit, but his real skill was muscle. He rose through the ranks because he was useful. Eventually, the Pisan faction elected him pope, hoping he could force the others to submit.
So you have a former pirate captain leading the church, but the cleanup crew eventually arrived.
The Council of Constance in 1414. They needed to fix the schism. Cosa thought he could outsmart them, but when he realized the tide was turning, he did what he knew best. He ran.
Fled disguised as a stable hand, I read.
Yes, but they caught him, and the charges they brought against him are staggering. 70 crimes, piracy, murder, rape, incest, sodomy. It was a laundry list of depravity.
And his punishment, I'm assuming burning at the stake.
You would think, but no. He was deposed, imprisoned for a few years, and then he paid a fine.
He paid a fine.
Paid a fine and was actually reinstated as a cardinal before he died.
That is the ultimate white-collar crime moment of the 15th century.
It just proves that if you had enough money and influence, you were untouchable, even if you were a pirate pope.
Which brings us to the climax. The name that is synonymous with corruption, the Borgias.
Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, elected in 1492. If the previous popes were bad, Rodrigo was the industrial scale version.
He didn't even try to hide the corruption.
No, not at all. He bought the papacy openly. The sources describe 4 mules laden with silver being driven to a rival cardinal's palace to secure the vote. It was a business transaction.
And once he was in, he turned the Vatican into a family business.
Nepotism comes from the Latin word for nephew, but Rodrigo made it about his children. He made his teenage son Cesar a cardinal. He used his daughter Lucretia as a political pawn, marrying her off to powerful families.
Right.
And then there are the stories about their lifestyle, the banquet of chestnuts.
What was that?
This is one of those stories that historians debate, but it was recorded by the Master of Ceremonies at the time. A banquet in the Vatican, 1501, involving 50 courtesans.
Roasted.
Yes. After dinner, chestnuts were scattered on the floor, and the women crawled around to pick them up while the Pope and his family watched. It reportedly turned into a massive orgy inside the apostolic palace.
It's hard to square that with the image of a spiritual leader. But there's a twist here. The expert source points out that Rodrigo wasn't just a party animal. He was actually a brilliant administrator.
That's the paradox. He was a major geopolitical player.
Hmm?
Have you ever wondered why Brazil speaks Portuguese while the rest of South America speaks Spanish?
I just assumed it was how the colonies were settled.
It was Rodrigo Borgia, the Treaty of Tordesillas. Spain and Portugal were fighting over the New World. So Rodrigo takes a map, draws a line down the Atlantic, and says everything east is Portugal, everything west is Spain.
And the tip of Brazil just happened to be east of the line.
Exactly. A corrupt pope drawing a line on a map decided the language of 200 million people today. His sins were local, but his power was global.
How did he finally meet his end?
There's poetic justice in the rumors. He died in 1503. The official cause was malaria, the bad air of Rome. But the persistent story is that he and Cesar tried to poison a rich cardinal to inherit his wealth.
And they mixed up the cups.
That's the legend. They drank their own poison. Cesare survived. Rodrigo didn't. Whether it's true or not, it fits the narrative of his life perfectly.
So, looking back at this entire timeline, we have 1,000 years of absolute chaos, forgeries, corpse trials, pornocracies, pirates, orgies. The obvious question is, how on earth is this institution still here?
That is the big question. By all logic, the papacy should have collapsed. Any secular kingdom with this level of incompetence and corruption would have been overthrown a dozen times over.
But the cleanup crew eventually arrived.
Yes, the Protestant Reformation was the wake-up call. When Martin Luther posts his thesis and half of Europe threatens to leave because your corruption is so obvious, you have to change. You get the Counter-Reformation, you get popes like Paul IV in the mid-1500s.
The buzzkill popes.
The strict inquisitors. They ended the era of the party popes. They imposed strict morality. It wasn't always pretty. It was often brutal, but it stopped the bleeding.
Now, the source material also touches on the modern context. We can't talk about sins of the church without acknowledging the abuse scandals of the 20th and 21st centuries.
And that is crucial. The nature of the sins changed. It stopped being about concubines and pirate fleets. It became about secrecy, protecting the institution over the victim, and abuse of power in a different, quieter form. But the core issue remains the same. That struggle between divine authority and human flaw.
It's a heavy legacy.
It is. These stories aren't just about bad men. They are case studies in what happens when an institution claims to be perfect while being run by people who are. Well, definitely not.
So what's the takeaway here? How should we view this survival story?
I think it leads us to a really provocative thought. Critics look at this history and say, look at the corruption. This proves it's all a sham.
Right, it delegitimizes the whole thing.
But there's an old Catholic joke, often attributed to Napoleon or Boccaccio, where a cardinal tells a critic, if we haven't managed to destroy the church in 2,000 years of corruption and incompetence, do you really think you can?
That is actually a great point.
So the question for you, for the listener, is this. Is the fact that the papacy survived its own dark ages, the pornocracy, the piracy, the murder, is that proof that the institution is divinely protected? Or is it simply proof that it is the most resilient and perhaps cynical political organization in human history?
Something to chew on. Thanks for guiding us through the history.
A pleasure.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.